Welcome to ACF Podcast, where men share their incredible stories of God's grace and His relentless pursuit of our hearts. Make sure to hit the subscribe button so you will be notified every time we upload a new podcast. We hope that you enjoy this story, and God bless.
Hi everybody, Pastor Mark here. I've got a blast from the past with me here today. Pastor Jack Dugan used to be my associate and youth pastor back in the day, with us here in the podcast studio at the lovely facilities of the Ashland Christian Fellowship. And we're going to be talking today about facing loneliness. But before I do, just want to say greetings.
Thank you, Mark. Glad to be here.
So way cool to have you here. We're up in the building, the room that you used to use is your for your teenagers up here, and your office was just over yonder.
Yeah, this was the spot, man. We pack this thing full of kids and make a bunch of noise, and usually too much noise.
Too much noise, and they would call you down.
And get in trouble. Yeah, that was the usual Wednesday.
You're pretty good at getting in trouble. I think that's why I like you.
That's right. We both have a knack for finding trouble.
No, I laugh at you getting in trouble.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's
true.
My job is to laugh at you.
Okay.
And
good.
We have a role to play, and I play mine, and you have to play yours. In case you guys didn't know, we sent Jack out in, 2004, 2002?
17 years ago?
17 years ago.
Yeah.
Wow, you're old.
I know.
Anyway,
older.
We sent Jack to Hawaii as a church to do a church plant on the big island of Hawaii, and he's suffering for Jesus in the tropical paradise of Hawaii.
It's very hard.
But no, it has been hard. I mean, it hasn't. Some of the ministry has not been all just smooth sailing.
Yeah, and I think everywhere someone goes, there's always a person there to go, well, it's not easy doing ministry here. Where is the easy place? I think
there is no easy place. But did you get a lot of razzing? Maybe you still do about ministering in Hawaii?
Yeah, no, that's constant. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, suffering for Jesus, huh? I just play into it now. Actually, it's awesome. We love it.
Well, I've been over to visit you a few times, and I think I would love it too. But, okay, God, you ready? No.
Always got room, yeah.
Oh, yeah?
Absolutely.
Yeah, plenty of room.
Yeah.
17 years. So recently, though, you guys got your own building for the first time in 17 years or whatever. Tell me about that, quick.
So when we went over there, there was a group of families. There were about 9 families that were praying for a pastor, and God put us together, and so that's what we started with, and they had started renting a Methodist church.
I was there.
Right.
Yeah, and you met in the afternoon, though, because they had services in the morning.
Yeah, so for 14, almost 15 years, we met in the afternoon, which was horrible. It never got better. We kept thinking, at some point, this is going to be normal, and everyone will get used to it. It was just always hard on families.
Yeah,
so
it would be.
Come for a while, and then they'd drift off, and
go to some other church or
exactly.
whatever. Yeah.
So probably about 3 years ago now.
Has it been that long?
Almost,
okay.
yeah. 2.5.
Mm-hmm.
One of the worship leaders in our church was also doing worship at the Baptist church in Waimea, which is the next town over. It's about 20 minutes away.
Just so you know, he's not swearing. That is a name of a denomination. Go ahead.
The Baptist church.
Yeah.
Southern Baptist Church.
Oh, you said it twice.
I know.
Go ahead.
So Chase was our guy, and he said, look, they haven't had a pastor in almost 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And they had gone through some really hard times, and the church was getting smaller and smaller. And he just said, what would you think of meeting with the leadership? And at first the idea was me pastoring both, and I was like, no, that's definitely not going to happen. And he said, well, what about merging the two churches? And I'd only seen a couple of church mergers in my time in ministry, and they were train wrecks.
Well,
they were horrible.
I don't know if I told you back in the day that I'd learned a little slogan: when you get the urge to merge, you better regurge. Because sometimes, well, it is.
Yeah.
And I've heard lots of stories. I was a little afraid that you would inherit a problem.
Oh, yeah. And so both sides were very hesitant, but it became obvious very quickly. So they were a church without a pastor. They had a building, and we were a church without a building, right? And so the Lord put us together, and we were all in the right spot.
Yeah.
Everybody kind of laid down their own ideas, and it's been fantastic.
But it's still a Calvary, right? You're Calvary Hillside.
We're actually a hybrid. So, yeah. So we're a mutant, the mutt dog.
The mutt dog.
Yeah. So I'm still a Calvary pastor, still connected with the Calvary guys in Hawaii. And Bill Stonebreaker is awesome, just a good friend of mine, and kind of oversees all of the churches there in Hawaii. But now I'm also a Southern Baptist pastor. And so I meet with those guys as well. They're also a great community, just love them.
Yeah.
And it's been great getting to know everybody and a lot of history there. They've been there for a long time.
Well, I keep forgetting, and some people don't know this, but I was Baptist. And when I joke about it because I always tell people I'm a recovering Baptist.
Right.
But what I've learned over the years is that not every kind of Baptist is the same.
Yeah.
The group we were with were almost cultic.
Yeah.
Very legalistic, very rigid, very and thought really genuinely that they were the only ones going to be part of the bride of Christ.
Yeah.
So when I hear the word Baptist, it always triggers me just a little bit. But I don't want anybody that is Baptist or we are non-denominational here, and we want to keep it that way. It's all about Jesus and not about your label. So,
yeah. And that was one of our biggest concerns when we first started talking about it. Again, within every denomination, you can find the extremes, right?
Oh, yeah.
And we didn't know what we were getting into, so we wanted to know where they were at when it came to the gifts of the Holy Spirit, the working of the Holy Spirit in the church.
That would be my first question,
right?
Actually.
And then, and really just their heart towards evangelism, working within our community, and they're very, very in line with Calvary Chapel.
Wow.
The group that we have, they made it very clear right off the bat, we're not in charge of you. You guys are completely independent. You will run this church how you want to.
Wow.
And we're here for support, we're here for encouragement and accountability as well, which we want that. We want to have that again, not somebody looking over our shoulder all the time, but somebody that is there to go making sure that we're all staying on track.
Yeah.
So like I said, fantastic family to be a part of.
That's way cool. And I'm super proud of you. And I can't wait for you to invite me over to dedicate the new building.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the merger's been great. Building's fantastic. Dedication's a little bit late. That was almost 2.5 years ago.
Well, I'm sorry, but it's not going to be official until I come.
That's true. Okay.
Yeah. I'm kidding. Hey, I got a chance to pick up Jack from Ben the other day, and we spent 3 hours in the car driving home, and we were doing a little commiserating and just talking about our lives. And then I threw the question out about some of the hardest parts of ministry, and it kind of triggered a little talk, and we thought about dedicating the podcast to that, but what we've decided to do is deal with one aspect that we've both struggled with, and I understand is kind of a common, what would you call it, occupational hazard of ministry, but it's not exclusively ministers who deal with loneliness. We want to talk to you today about facing loneliness, dealing with the intense isolation feeling. And with this COVID thing that's going on, man, people, especially when we were quarantined, were dealing with intense loneliness. But what I just read an article today thinking about this podcast that people who are looking to social media to fill that gap spend inordinate amount of time posting, reading, and then when they stop, they feel a greater sense of isolation than they felt ever before. Isn't that kind of a mystery to me? Yeah,
I think that social media, any type of social media, is like eating sugar candy all day, hoping that you're going to feel satisfied.
And you just,
you just cram it in until I've got enough, and you just feel ill afterwards. And I think social media has a place.
Yeah.
I think it's something that can be very healthy in a person's life. But I think, especially if we're struggling with loneliness, if that's our only outlet to try and solve loneliness, it's not going to do it. Mm-hmm. It's just going to, like you said, make the void even bigger.
Mm-hmm. Well, you can be as personal as you want to with this and as transparent as you feel comfortable. But what was it that brought this to light in your own life? Can you kind of highlight that for us a little bit?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I never considered myself to be a person that was lonely. I mean, I thought pretty squared away. You've got friends, got family, got people that I know I can lean on, like you. And so what had taken place for me, and this was about 1.5 years ago, where I had this pet cat that I just loved. And she was my buddy. We went everywhere together. And she got hit by a car and died. And it was actually really hard.
Traumatic.
I've lost animals before.
Traumatic. This one was hard.
This one was hard. And
anybody that's lost a pet, I mean, they really get it.
Yeah, and I always feel kind of silly talking about it.
You shouldn't. No, you shouldn't.
But anyhow. So one night I had a dream that I was in this counselor's office, and I never saw the counselor. It was a woman's voice, and she asked me the question of, how are you doing since your cat Friday passed away, since she died? And I said, well, I'm trying to hold it together. I'm afraid if I give in to my depression, it's going to really take hold of me. And I've struggled with depression since I was in high school, on and off. Just those days you wake up and, man, you're in the pit and you don't even know why. And, and so in the dream, I just said that was my concern, is that I was going to get depressed. And she said, you don't struggle with depression. And I thought, well, I know what I struggle with.
Yeah.
I said,
What
of
are you
course.
telling me what I...
No, I do. I said, I've struggled with depression since I was a kid, and it can be a real issue. And she goes, no, you're wrong. You don't struggle with depression. You struggle with loneliness. And it woke me from the dream. And I sat up in bed and went, loneliness? And probably for the next few days, I just kept repeating that over and over. I'm not depressed. I'm lonely? No. Really? And it was, and then I really felt like the dream was from the Lord, that he was revealing something to me. And so then I argued with him a lot about it.
I like to do that, but he always wins. Have you noticed?
It does seem like he's right.
Yeah, he's been God for a long time, they tell me.
Exactly. And so, again, I've never even considered this. So I started doing a little research, and fully with the idea that I'm going to look into loneliness and see that, no, that's not me. And instead, it seemed like it was just reading my mail. Things about my attitude, how I deal in social situations. And so I just started coming to the terms with, I'm lonely? And again, I've got friends, I've got my family. How can I be lonely and be surrounded by people all the time? And so in my research, what I kind of came to the surface, in my case, and I think it's different for a lot of people. I think there's, just like depression, there are far greater degrees of the loneliness that people get entrapped in. But for me, it was like this ongoing background program that was just playing
in the background.
It was very subtle. It wasn't anything that was like this ongoing, like loud voice in my head. It was just always in the background. And it was things like when we'd get in a social gathering, I just kind of always felt like it doesn't matter if I'm here or not. That nobody really noticed when I showed up, and nobody would notice if I left. And it was this overwhelming sense of insignificance. And that's one of the things that kept coming up in the research, that you can be surrounded by people all the time, but if in your head you're constantly feeling that insignificance, that it can choke you.
Wow.
And that was the case. I mean, it was always the joke in my family that when we would go to a party, Dad was the party pooper, and that every party needs a pooper. That's Dad.
Yeah.
And so, I could handle it for about an hour, but then that overwhelming insignificance would just wear me down. And I'm like, we got to go.
Well, and the reason I wanted to talk to you about it is twofold. I think there's a lot of people who struggle with loneliness, but when you talked about that, I thought about, I've been called socially awkward all my adult life.
Yeah.
And that is, on the stage, I can be engaging, and one-on-one, I can really, seem to integrate with people and do fairly well. But there's always a sense that I have a limit, where if I get around too many people too long, I gotta get away. I just I get choked out. I always thought it was the introvert in me, but it's interesting that you drew attention to that.
Right. And well, I thought the same thing, is that I always just kind of told people I'm just an introvert, even though I'm up in front of people on Sunday and I can teach a Bible study, but I'm more introverted. And I think that is part of my personality. But it isn't just, I don't like being in social circumstances. It's that it becomes smothering.
Yeah.
Not at first. It increases, right? And so the longer I'm there, and for me, that's what it really came down to. That I was always kind of looking for that escape of, I can't keep dealing with that background program running, right? And then I started kind of backtracking it into even to my childhood, that my daughter had asked me a question. She's a psychology major, and so she every once in a while hits me with these questions. And she had asked, what do you think people think of you when you're not around?
Okay.
And I went, they don't. Nobody thinks of me if I'm not around. That literally, if I'm not in their sight, I'm completely out of mind.
Well, I can tell you for a fact that's not true, but that's how you felt?
Absolutely. And it was just that when somebody would tell me, oh, hey, we were talking about you the other day. Really? It would totally shock me. I didn't think you even knew I existed if I wasn't standing in front of you. And so, again, that's one of those things about
it's just
loneliness.
Played into that tape that was in the background going, you're insignificant.
Exactly.
Wow.
No, and it's really, no matter what you do, it doesn't matter. It isn't that they don't care. They just don't think of you.
Wow.
Right. And so, again, that was one of those little key things that was coming up in this research, is that idea that you cease to exist in other people's minds when you're not around. And I thought, oh, man. And so anyhow, it's been quite a journey to look at these things and to realize that what a huge influence it's had in my life. The way I treat other people, the way I am, not just in social parties, but at church or even one-on-one, that, it's influenced so much of what I'm doing.
Now, Jack, do you think that has anything to do with the ministry position? I mean, have you always been this way, or is it something that developed and intensified over time?
I think I've always been this way to some degree, because I can remember instances when I was a kid where there were very clear signs of this.
Okay.
What I thought was independence, but it was more loneliness.
Mm-hmm.
But I think ministry it's been amplified, and which is kind of what the enemy does, right? I mean, he takes our shortcomings, he takes our temptation, whatever it is, and exploits them to bring us to a place of isolation. Right? Divide and conquer. It's the same old strategy, right?
Well, it works. That's why he's been doing it for so long.
Exactly. And so loneliness it's a downward spiral, because you don't like being in social circumstances, you don't like being at parties, so you avoid people. And the more you avoid people, the more lonely you get.
Right. Yeah.
And it just down you go. And I think it causes us to be very guarded when it comes to ministry, which it's easy to get guarded anyway.
Well, because I've only been in ministry since I was 21, my whole frame of reference is in the ministry. And when you get hurt and people expect a lot from you, and there's high expectations on ministers and pastors' families. And over the years, I've just developed a real guarded heart. Yeah. And I'll be honest, it's really, it's guarded. And I teach that we should love with open arms the way Jesus did. Here I am, hurt me if you want to, but this is my love for you. Yeah. But in reality, it's more of are you going to stab me, or what do you want from me? And that's created more, as I get older, more feelings of introvert. I just want to go and do my thing and then go hide out. But I have to tell you that it has, especially in the last few months, those moments when I go, man, I just don't feel like I have anybody who fully understands what I'm going through. Right. Yeah. And it's, in fact, I called you the other day because I was in one of those moods where I'm going, man, I'm drowning. I really need to, get some help here, and reach out, and it was just the Lord that helped. But I think a lot of people struggle with that. What would you say to them?
For sure. And I think it's probably increased a lot during the whole lockdown. Yeah. Right. Or it's been maybe made more obvious. Is maybe an underlying issue, but now it's been brought to the forefront. And to some degree, I guess that's what I was talking about when I was a kid. There were a lot of signs. I've never felt like I fit in anywhere. I've never felt like I was part of a group. I always felt on the outside, just a little bit off. And I was joking around a little bit, but when we were talking about me being the hybrid pastor, that now I got two groups I don't fit into, right?
Instead of having more groups that you do fit in, you have two that you don't.
Exactly. Yeah. That I don't feel like I've ever quite fit into the Calvary model, and now that I certainly don't fit into a lot of the Southern Baptist models, and I'm just kind of like the mutt that is like hanging around, and everyone's like, oh yeah, it's kind of cute. No, okay, beat it, kid. And that's kind of how I've been my whole life, whether it's with my family, with friends, that I've just that background program.
You weren't the cool kid in high school?
I was striving to be the cool kid in high school. Okay. And I was the troublemaker and the class clown.
Well, I definitely relate to the class clown. You make me laugh. I don't know what I mean. That's one of the things I like about you, Jack.
Yeah. And so I think that was my attempt. Again, if I don't exist unless I'm in front of somebody, then it was every attempt to be in front of people all the time.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
But that's exhausting.
Yeah, and you can only keep that up so long.
Right.
It drains you and takes a toll on you, and eventually it has an emotional toll and a physical toll. Probably. Did you notice any kind of physical symptoms, like were you just exhausted or tired, or what was going on there too?
A lot of lack of motivation. And I think at the same time, when the Lord was revealing this to me, that there was, along with the background program, what has started to be more obvious that was also running is nothing matters.
Wow.
And it was just always there. Again, it doesn't matter if you're here. Doesn't matter if you're gone. Doesn't matter if you're part of this group or you're not a part of this group. Therefore, whatever you do also doesn't matter. And that was starting to, that was almost audible in the background all the time.
Yeah, that's satanic, man.
Yeah, and I think without too much of a push, loneliness can get to a place that's very destructive.
Yeah.
It's not just isolation, but then it can Again, if it doesn't matter if you're here, it doesn't matter if you're here at all.
Wow.
I don't feel like it got that far with me, and I feel like the Lord's taken me so far from that place, but I definitely see the possibility of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of my big concerns with COVID and with the lockdown, and now even with kids that are going to have to do all their schooling at home. We're created to be social.
We are.
And
that, by the way, that's a God-given thing.
Yeah.
It's not something that's just the human characteristic. It's godlike.
Right.
He existed in fellowship with himself in eternity past. He made Adam and Eve and mankind for the purpose of fellowship, and not that he had a need, but it's just his nature, and he gave that nature to us. And
Right.
we have a definite DNA. Part of our DNA is to be in community with other people.
And from the beginning, it's not good that man is alone.
There you go.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, again, it's not even what other people are doing that causes us to be lonely, right? It's a perceived rejection that doesn't exist. It's all up here. And that's that background program running.
Yeah.
That causes us to be alone even when we're in a crowd or when we're at church or in
Yeah.
fellowship. And
Wow.
again, that guardedness of, well, I can have a conversation with you about ordinary things. I can even seem to get into some deep things, but I'm not really going to get deep.
Not going to bear it all.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because again, not only, it isn't that I'm even necessarily worried about getting hurt. It's that the things that are deep to me, I believe that they don't really care about.
Nobody cares.
Yeah. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, why would I share with them if I'm insignificant and then
Yeah.
they never think about me?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, because I knew we were going to do this, I typed into my search program, the idea of loneliness, and I was surprised to find some famous Christians. William Carey is called the father of Christian or modern missions, and he said, "Oh, that I had an earthly friend on whom I could unbosom my soul." And even George Gallup, I found this out, he's the guy that created all that Christian polling data, said this: "I think we are a very lonely populace. We are cut apart from each other." And then Bill Gothard said, "Loneliness becomes our friend when it forces us to enjoy the friendship of God as much as we would the friendship of others." So it's a craving that we have that I don't think enough interaction is ever going to really fully satisfy. We would maybe think that the answer is, I need a close friend, or I need a buddy, or I need something. But how has the Lord been helping you? He identified the problem. How has he been dealing with helping you find a solution or to live with it, I guess?
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, just showing me that it even was there.
Yeah.
And revealing this background program that, again, it's not like I sat around thinking about this stuff and, sitting in a dark room talking about how lonely I am or anything. It was just in the background. And so when the Lord started to show me that that's really what was taking place, then kind of tuning my ears to that background program, recognizing it, was a big part.
Yeah.
Just going, oh, okay, that's an issue. I am lonely. One of the interesting things that I found, so I had always thought it was depression, and depression and loneliness certainly can be connected.
Well, and they probably feed each other too.
Right.
I know that I struggle with depression. My wife struggles with depression. Our family does, and it isolates.
Yeah.
It isolates you from others, but it also can isolate you from God, where you just feel cut off and unimportant and of no value. But loneliness, I'm sure, can feed into both. But
yeah, absolutely. One of the interesting things that I found is depression. It's hard to know what's triggering it.
Yeah.
Right? It's like a huge blanket that covers everything.
Oh, yeah.
And because it covers everything, then it's like, well, what actually started it? We don't know because it's covering everything.
Yeah.
Loneliness is always relational. That whatever triggered it has to do with a relation in your life. And maybe it's just something that you perceived or a rejection that you thought you had. Maybe it was an actual rejection. But for me, that was a big help. To go, because when I thought I was just facing depression, basically it was just a matter of getting through.
yeah, you're just white knuckling it and just getting up, not let it beat you, but you just go through the day
and you just go, well, okay, this is where I'm going to be for might be a few days, might be a week or more. You just kind of, well, I know there's light at the end of the tunnel. I just got to keep moving, but recognizing that it has something to do with relationship, and then I could backtrack a little bit. Okay, what's happened in the last few days that's triggered this? And so far, every time I've been able to go.
There is some kind of an event or a situation, but you don't think about it at the moment necessarily. You think about it later.
Yeah. And so it might be something that I said or it was said to me, or anything like that. But I'm able to run the tape back and go, oh, okay, there's what triggered it. And so it's pretty easy. It's not necessarily fun, but you go back and you like, maybe you make that conversation right and go, we didn't leave that well, and maybe I misunderstood you, or whatever it might be.
Close the loop. But you also said that sometimes that loneliness is just a perceived insignificance, a perceived, and it doesn't even have to be real, does it?
No. For me, most of the time it's not.
But it is some kind of an event that happened that either you misinterpreted or were triggered by. Yeah. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And so, yeah, that's been a huge help.
Wow.
And sometimes you're not able to go back and fix it or make it right. But just identifying, okay, I'm not thinking about that in the right mind. Again, that's a perceived rejection that isn't actual.
It's not real.
It's not a real rejection.
Yeah.
And again, I wouldn't say it's like this snap, all of a sudden you're better, but I'm able to think through that process and work through it. And so that's been a big one. Just identifying it, just being able to, I don't know, work through it a little bit easier instead of being this overwhelming weight that I have no direction to go with.
Right.
And a big one was, I started thinking about loneliness and how much the Lord must understand this type of loneliness, because he never fit in. He didn't fit in his earthly family. He didn't fit in with the 12 disciples. They rejected him. They denied him. And, I think about that time in the Garden of Gethsemane. That
even his closest friends wouldn't sustain him or support him.
Yeah. Come and pray with me. And they're sleeping.
Yeah.
Right? I think it's the loneliest moment in the history of the universe.
Wow. And you make my mind run. What about that moment when he perceived that God had turned his back on him? Yeah. He cries out from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? Talk about intense loneliness. I mean, to be cut off from everybody, including your Heavenly Father.
Yeah.
Man, that's heavy.
And so then I started thinking, okay, well, the Lord understands, and like in Hebrews 4, it talks about our high priest is able to sympathize with our temptations.
Because he's been touched with our infirmities. Yeah.
Right, right. Yeah. But he is without sin, but he understands.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, wow, okay. So the Lord gets this, right? I'm not in this alone.
Amen.
He understands it to a far greater degree. And then realizing that he faced it all, that we would never have to be alone again.
Amen.
That we don't have to have loneliness the way he faced loneliness.
Right. I was hoping you'd get there. I mean, really, there's two elements to this. There's the physical, the human, but if we really understand our Bible right, we have the intimacy of the Holy Spirit and God, within us, to satisfy that deep craving for intimacy, or at least to give us a fountain from which to face, the whatever loneliness we might be wrestling with.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was, a breakthrough for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also not, I wish I was spiritual enough that would be enough, right?
Well, I don't think God created us that way. I'll be honest. I think the super spiritual and the super spiritualization of that idea is I should be content with God alone. Well, God said it's not good for man to be alone.
Right.
And that was before sin entered the garden. That wasn't a consequence of sin.
Yeah.
That was a consequence of the creation that God had designed within us. So I don't think it's like being unspiritual to say I need God, but I also need people. I was preparing for today's podcast, and Psalm 68 talks about he sets the solitary in families. And when Jeremiah complained in Jeremiah 15, God, you've made me alone. I'm absolutely alone, and what you're asking me to do is too hard. Later, he had to repent of that attitude, because not only had God given him a calling, but God said, I'm going to see you through it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people need to hear, is that he's going to get us through it. It may not be easy, but we don't have to do it alone.
Right.
We don't have to face it alone.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to me, it's comforting. And just even having the conversation with you yesterday in the car, I go, wow, that's awesome, that we can at least address this on a deeper heart level.
Right, right. And so with that in mind, the next part that the Lord kind of led me to start applying this to my life was, rather than looking for people to fill my loneliness, to cure my loneliness, that I would be the one to meet theirs. And it, again, changed the game. So instead of going to a party and feeling,
wondering who was going to notice you.
Right. Or care if I was there, that I would make sure that any conversation I had, I was 100% in. I wasn't letting myself...
Fully present.
Right.
Not just thinking about a million things, but you're actually present with that person, focusing on them.
With the things that they want to talk about. Right. So I'm not, you know how we can all be when we're in a conversation, that we're just waiting for them to shut up long enough for us to say our next thing. Right. Oh, I've got such a good point. I can't wait till they just be quiet. Oh, and then, we jump in.
We're not even listening.
No, exactly. And so.
Well, I hate it when people do that to me.
Well, sure.
Don't they understand what they're doing to me when they do that?
They're missing out on all my good points.
That's right.
With all their somewhat good points. So, yeah. And so by doing that, it changed my purpose in being in social gatherings. Right? That I was there for them. I was there for another person. Now, maybe they have no struggle with loneliness at all, but I want to make sure that when I'm talking with them, I'm fully present, engaged in what they're interested in, and asking questions to draw them out even more. Wow. And that's not my personality. I mean, I'm not the guy going, please tell me more about how you feel.
Well, you're not with others, but you have been with me.
True.
I mean, you have, I don't, because that's maybe the depth of our friendship.
Right.
It's one of the things that's refreshing about it is that I don't feel like you just talk about you all the time. You let me talk about me all the time.
Right. Right. But it's funny.
When I heard you say that though about you go to a party to do for others what you recognize as a need in yourself, isn't that kind of tied to what Jesus said to, do unto others?
Yeah. Love your neighbors as
you love yourself, or do unto them as you would have them do unto you. So it's the deep heartache that you have, and instead of trying to go out and find people to meet your need, meet, take, you become a giver, where you go and say, I'm going to make sure that person is heard and noticed and cared for. How does that then? Does it have a payback?
Oh yeah. No, absolutely. It changes everything. So instead of me buying in, and I think at the same time, you start recognizing that voice. So I'm in a crowd of people, or I'm at a party. Like we had a big Super Bowl party. Some friends were like, oh, come on over. And almost right away, I could hear that in the background.
Here's the tape playing again.
Exactly. And so, but now I'm ready for it. And I'm like, no, I'm not listening to that.
Wow.
And I just made sure that, again, who I was talking to, I'm fully engaged. I want to hear about their lives and really investing into them, wanting to know them, right? Yeah. Not just playing a game, not just pretending to be interested, caring about who they are. And these were friends of mine. So it was pretty easy, right? These weren't strangers, but the people that I really care about. And it was a real test for me. So, if this was going to work, and it worked amazingly.
But you don't find yourself talking about this a lot, do you? To the others, saying, "Hey, I want to talk to you about my loneliness."
No.
Hey, can we talk about my?
Yeah. Every time someone says, "Jack, how you doing?" Well, let me tell you about my
I'm lonely, and
and they're like, "I gotta go." No, I mean, I'm probably just a handful of people. Of course. My wife Candy has been amazing, and when this first started coming
By the way, you married up. I sure did. Yeah, I just wanted you to know that.
I just keep hoping that she's not going to realize, how blessed I am. So yeah, we have talked a lot about these things, and she's been great just to kind of ask me questions and how's that going, and the party that we were talking about, while part of me wanted to get out of there after an hour or two, I chose. It's like, no, I'm staying for a while. Maybe we'll be the last people here. And it kind of gave me an aggressiveness towards my loneliness. Like, I'm not going to let you rule my life anymore. And then facing it, like, come on, bring it. I'm among people that I love. And so I'm going to stay here.
You're not shadowboxing anymore. Now you know who your enemy is. You know what language he's using. You're not going to let him yank your chain.
Exactly.
I like
exactly.
that. We're not ignorant of his devices, Paul said about the devil. So
exactly. So, yeah, it was very successful, and I've just continued to try and do that. Certainly there are times where afterwards I'm like, oh, man, I totally forgot about, really focusing, and I was all over the place. And but the times where I do that, I really feel great success, and just like the Lord's right there with me going, hey, we're in this together. We're going to get through it. And these people do care about you, and don't let the enemy sidetrack you. That whole thing that he's like a roaring lion. And that picture is that the roaring lion uses the roar or causes fear in order to drive the antelope or the prey toward the other lions who are waiting for them, right? And that's the same thing. The enemy uses our fear to drive us into the trap.
Yeah.
And I think that fear of loneliness, that fear of
Right.
insignificance,
Right.
over and over again, drives us into a trap.
Right.
And so when we face the roaring lion and go, no,
Right.
yeah,
Well, I was talking to somebody last week who's a family member of theirs had struggled with suicidal thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And when it came to light, one of the issues that this individual was really, really dealing with was, my presence is a burden to people, not a blessing.
right,
And I think it's a lie. I know it's a lie.
Yeah.
But in this individual, the feeling had become so pronounced that everybody would be better off if I was not around. But it sounds like it had a kind of a twin in this loneliness. I'm insignificant. I don't matter. My presence is a burden to people. I think the devil's using that.
I think that's the next step, right?
And it could be, couldn't
Right.
it? In
So-
the downward spiral,
Right.
if it didn't get better, it could lead to this despair and despondency.
Not only am I insignificant,
Yeah.
I'm a burden.
Right.
I think that is the natural progression. And
How tragic. And you and I know a pastor who ended up taking his life, and it's just a series of events. It was a downward spiral into really not having an active ministry of giving out.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's kind of went on. And of course, I wasn't in his head. I don't know what he was thinking, but I can only imagine that at that moment, before he took his own life, it was like, I'd be better off if I was, everybody would be better off if I was gone.
Right.
That's just tragic.
it is tragic.
Sad.
And it's heartbreaking. And again, I think while a lot of people might not be at that extreme or even go to that extreme, the consuming part of loneliness in the lockdown, and even now we've got a little bit more freedom. People are around, and sure, we're wearing masks, but we can go to restaurants and things like that.
Yeah.
I think just a little bit of what I've seen in some of the people I've talked to, I think that the seeds of loneliness have been planted in people's lives.
I do too. I definitely do. And I think the enemy's trying to exploit it and use it.
Right.
That coupled with one of the things we thought about talking about today was I wanted to think about the divisiveness that's happening in the church and how people are so polarized. You
Right.
know, we've been just over so many things that divide us and further isolate us. But we want to talk about, and we kind of want to give people practical points. So if you were talking to somebody today that says, whoa, maybe I'm battling loneliness, what would you say to them?
I think starting off, again, checking that background program. What have you been hearing? Mm-hmm. Is it that idea of being completely insignificant or unnecessary? What is it? Identify that. Pray through that. The Lord knows. He's able to reveal those things to us. And then talk to somebody that you do care about.
Yeah.
Somebody that you've got in your life, and maybe that's a family member, maybe it's your pastor or somebody that you can go into and go, look, I'm just starting to recognize this might be a struggle for me.
Yeah.
Because, again, bringing it out into the light, it just disarms the enemy.
Yeah.
And I know for me it was huge to be able to talk to my wife and go, I think this might be an issue. What do you think? She goes, well, never thought of you as being lonely, but a lot of the things, I'd read her stuff that I found in articles. She goes, yeah, that sounds like you. And so I think going to somebody and just bringing it out into the light and getting some feedback from them. And it's, well, again, you're not looking to them to be the answer for your loneliness. It is awfully reassuring to have somebody go, I hope you know that's a lie.
Yeah.
One of the guys that I did share this with, a good friend of mine, Doug, and I told him, gosh, the Lord's really shown me all these things, and I was excited about it because I felt like there's some victory happening.
Absolutely. Self-awareness is the pathway to, the next step of victory and surrender.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And he stops me mid-sentence and goes, you do know that's a lie, right? And I'm like, I'm learning that. I'm on my way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so...
And that's what I would want to make sure that you hear this too if you're struggling with loneliness and you feel insignificant. It's not true.
Right.
You have intense value, and the Lord paid an awful lot to have a relationship with you, and it's really important that people hear that, because the devil will lie to us and just keep that lie feeding and looping and looping and looping around until we start believing the lie, and then, man, we're in trouble.
Yeah,
it
absolutely.
Happens to all of us, I think, on some level. Yeah.
For sure. And I think from there, so, first being real honest with the Lord.
Own
right?
it.
Own it.
Yep.
And share, be accountable to others
Okay.
to say, this is something that I'm just maybe investigating and getting some feedback. And then try and have some real practical ways of diffusing it.
Yeah.
Like I said, those conversations where you're like, you are going to be the one curing their loneliness, not worrying about yours. And what you'll find is that yours gets solved along the way. And in fact, you won't even think about it.
That's awesome.
Right.
It makes me think about how we can take something that the devil means for evil and turn it around for good.
Yeah.
So he's using loneliness to isolate, separate, make us more and more filled with despair and whatever thoughts might be taking us deeper and deeper. And instead we reach out to someone else. And so what he's trying to do backfires, and we end up being part of God's remedy for somebody else. So I love it. Own it. Talk about it with somebody you trust,
Yeah.
And then begin to invest in other people. He that has friends, what is that proverb? Must show himself friendly.
Yeah.
To always not say, hey, what can you do for me, but what can I do for you? Again,
Yeah.
What else?
I think and this goes along with beginning to talk to people about it and attempt to be the cure for their loneliness, is you start listening to things that might cue you in on that background program that's playing in their head. I think to some degree everybody can relate with not fitting in.
Yeah.
Right. And so now when I hear somebody go, yeah, when I was a kid I didn't really fit in, or I wasn't able to really feel at home, even at home, or that, those are the things that I'll really key into now.
Yeah.
And go, I understand that. Right. And so that they know they're not the only one, that gives us a commonality.
Absolutely.
That man, I know what it is to be the outsider. And I feel like I've always been the outsider to some degree. And okay, and I don't like to push and try and drag things at them, but I do like to ask some questions. Well, what else is there? Do you feel like that in every area of your life, or just, I don't know. I think it's really good. Again, you're tuning in to what's happening in someone else's life rather than looking to somebody to solve our problems.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah. That reminds me, I've taught on depression quite a few times over the years because I struggle with it myself. And I remember reading about a lady that went to a counselor repeatedly with depression. One day she shows up and she's just super happy, just bubbly and joyful. And he goes, wow, what happened to you? And she goes, well, on my way down here, I stopped at a care facility where my aunt was, and I started talking to her and to some of the other patients in the room, and man, it was just fun. I just left feeling so good.
Yeah.
And so the counselor said, well, why don't you do more of that? And according to the story, she looked at the counselor and said, why would I want to do that? Which is so ironic. I mean, when she got her mind off of herself and her own, sadness, and began to invest, even in her case, it was incidental. She did it accidental, but it had a cathartic effect on her. She felt better by caring about someone else. I think it might be true for loneliness too.
Yeah, for sure. And letting that be part of your calling, right? That you're out to meet other people in their loneliness, meet other people in their need, and making that part of the reason that we were redeemed.
Amen.
Right?
Amen. And I used to have a slogan that I used a lot in various settings, and I would say, whatever God has taken you through, often he makes you a minister too.
Yeah.
So if you've gone through abortions and you've struggled with the trauma of the aftershocks of that, who better to minister to other people who are going through that? If you've dealt with divorce, or you've dealt with depression, or you've dealt with loneliness, who better to be God's tool to minister to someone else? What he leads you through, he often makes you a minister to.
But isn't it funny how the enemy tries to use those same things to keep us from serving others?
Oh, yeah.
I'm disqualified.
I don't have anything to offer.
I can barely even be in a social gathering. How could I talk to somebody else about what's important to them, or what And it's the very thing that we're struggling with that will make that deep connection with another person.
That is true. Yeah. And it becomes, it's not just a shallow, talk about the weather kind of a thing. You literally are looking at somebody, caring about somebody, pouring into somebody, listening to them, whether they know why you're doing it or not.
Right.
In fact, you wouldn't want to say, I'm lonely, that's why I'm talking to you. Right? Probably wouldn't want to buy the T-shirt that says, I don't care about you, but I want you to think I do.
Right. Because I'm so lonely. And you're right here. Yeah.
Oh, Jack, it's so fun to have you here. And anybody that gets a chance to see this podcast, we're going to have Jack teaching on Sunday. You're going to be teaching from, you said, the Lord you think is laid on you? The
James
first,
chapter 1.
James chapter 1. You know, I have to say it's not my favorite chapter because it's got that part in there that says to count it all joy when you fall into various trials. Are you going to skip that part?
No, that's actually the focus.
Oh, shoot.
We're dialing in on that.
Oh, man. I think I feel a headache coming on Sunday. No, I'm kidding. Thank you for tuning in. We love you, and if we can help you in any way, please reach out to the church in any way we can offer prayer, support, encouragement. Find somebody that you can talk to. Find somebody. The Lord cares about you, loves you very much. And he died to have a relationship with you, so you're not alone. You never have to fear that he's going to abandon you. And he's created you uniquely to be a blessing to others. So thank you, Jack, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, God bless you, man.
All right, God bless you, man.